Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about terrorism in Ukraine. We will see and define terrorism in Ukraine. We will see what actually forms it has and what measures it has. We'll touch the question of the impact of terrorism and see what we have in terms of the activities of the counterterrorism activities in Ukraine. What was done already and what are the main problems that should be addressed. So terrorism in Ukraine. Actually, if we take the global terrorism index, we can see that we take the 24th position on this index with the high impact of terrorism in society. And definitely it goes down for the recent year, but comparing, for example, with the 2014 or 2015, when we have the very high impact of terrorism because of the conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine, and usually this index can show that the majority of cases of terrorism, the high impact is touching of these countries which are affected by war. Nevertheless, we still are at the risky group, take into account this index, and we are just moving very slowly to the down. However, if we take not the place of this index, but if you take actually the data and see how the terrorism is growing in Ukraine, you can see that comparing to the world in general, we don't have many casualties out of the terrorism. And what is also interesting that definitely we almost do not have casualties until the 2013 when the war broke out, and in 2014 we have the highest rates of casualties because of the terrorism. And even here on the chart you can see that we have near zero, yes, and comparing to the world that is growing, and 2014 is also done because it is one of the highest years in terms of terrorism because of war in the Middle East. Actually, if we take the number of the not casualties, but compare these casualties and killings with the number of the deaths overall in the country, you can also see that, take into account Ukraine, the 2014 was really dangerous, but nevertheless it was near 0.2% of the Ukrainian population that died because of the different reason. Why the largest amount were in Syria, in the world overall, so almost more than 3% of the population because of the conflict. And in general, in the world, you can also see that despite these numbers, more than 45,000 of people, we can see that more people in the world are dying because of the, let's say, heart diseases or cancer than of the terrorist attack. Actually, in 2017, if you take the all cases in the world, once more, the situation in Ukraine was pretty calm comparing to the cases, let's say, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, or Nigeria, when the war is in the more active phase than in Ukraine. And you can see that only 40 casualties we have of the terrorism attacks once more, because the number of the terrorist attacks are linked to the ongoing conflict that we have. And in the majority of cases, these are war casualties on the eastern part of Ukraine. And then you can see that in the United States, they have even more casualties and deaths from the terrorist attacks, at least in 2017, than in Ukraine. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that the situation is pretty calm here. Luckily, we have lesser and lesser casualties. Nevertheless, in general, starting from 2013, we have this grows because of war, of the number of terrorist attacks. So here on this chart, that was presented by the Ukrainian Institute for Research of Extremism. We can see what is the direct impact of the war in terms of the terrorist attacks in Ukraine. So you can see that starting from 2013, we have an increase in the number of terrorist attacks overall that are defined in the article 259 of the pardon of the criminal code of Ukraine. We also have the cases of creation of different terrorist groups, and this is quite interesting of Ukraine because it involves it is calculated the number of such groups on the Donbas area, on the eastern part of Ukraine, but also because of the let's say religious terrorist supporting groups that use Ukrainian territory as for the formation of groups that will be going to Syria, but we'll talk about it later. And also we can see that in terms of the financial terrorism, these are also cases when these unlawful deeds were noticed and prevented. So you can see that in 2015 we had at least 184 cases of the financing of the terrorism attack. So nowadays, in 2018 and 19, we have approximately 1,200 of the terrorist cases per year. And so this is more than 1,000 cases per year that what we have right now. And definitely, as you may notice, so the majority of cases were happening because of war in the eastern part of Ukraine. And this unfortunately doesn't affect it only military cases, but also civilians. And you can see here mainly different data, but overall we can state, as we know, that 13,000 of Ukrainians were killed during these war events starting from 2014, and more than 30,000 of people were wounded. And this is all other results of terrorism, because according to the national legislation, even until the 2018, we had the anti-terroristic operation. That's why all this data refers to the official terrorist attacks. And you can see the increase of the cases in terms of civilians year by year. And we can see that the greatest part of people were simply killed in 2015. This is civilian deaths. And closer to 2020, what we have right now, so the number of the casualties of civilians, they dramatically decreased, and this hopefully, this is good. So, but overall, we can state that this is data from United Nations observation mission that at least 3,500 of civilians unfortunately died because of the conflict on the eastern part of Ukraine. And once more, they are officially recognized as the deaths due to these terrorist attacks. So once more, if we look the growth of these terrorist cases, and if we take the UN statistics that the observation mission is doing here for the observation for the human rights, we can see that the majority of the cases where people were killed or injured, this is a beginning it's not actually beginning of war, but this was happening like in 2018, but closer to the 2020, with the several attempts to do the ceasefire in Ukraine, to stop ceasefire in Ukraine, actually to ceasefire in Ukraine. It's dramatically decreased. So to some extent, these negotiations and talks and the attempts to ceasefire are pretty working, at least for the civilians. And here we can see the overall data year by year. When in 2014 we have the majority of the deaths of civilians. One more, I'm quoting here, only civilians. So in 2020, it was only 18 cases, at least until June, if I'm not mistaken, pardon, until August. And hopefully we will not have these cases anymore. What is interesting here, if we actually see the reasons of the deaths, you can see here by this chart. So these are small arms and light weapons fires, so accident fires of shooting. However, we can see the large group of the injuries or even kills because of the explosives and because of the mines that are put it into the war territory. So this simply means that yeah, the war affected a lot, and the direct kills are not so huge comparing to the accidental kills that are happening in the eastern part of Ukraine. But whenever the reason is, nevertheless, you clearly see here how the impact of this war on our cases. However, once more, so this is a situation due to the war, unfortunately, but actually we have a large pretty stories of the terrorism that were happening before that, and that were connected with organized crimes, and that were happening even before the 2013. And there is a nice article of the Kirilenko and Lukasheva, the hostages of fear, on Ukrainian Pravda, that actually showed the larger cases of the terrorism attacks that were happening before the wartime and after the wartime, but that are concentrated not with the war issues. So I will quote some of the interesting cases here. So the first huge happening of the terrorism in Ukraine is connected with 94, with Igor Chichkin, who actually take hostages in the kindergarten of the Luhansk region, and that was probably the first like large case of the terrorist attack in Ukraine. So he demanded like $500,000 of US dollars and a plane to United States, and because he believed that he has problems with the mental health, so when he will be going to United States to cure himself. Actually, there were no injuries, nobody was wounded, and nobody was killed, luckily, and he was captured, and he indeed has the mental health troubles, so some psychological troubles. But nevertheless, it was to some extent one of the so-called very popular cases at the Ukrainian history. So later there were several cases, but probably in the 2002 and 2003, Ukrainians were shocked by the 3 major explosions in the city buses in the city of Vinnytsia. So it was several times, starting in fall, if I'm not mistaken, in November, and then ending with March. So three times through this period, there were explosions in the city buses, and unfortunately 2 people were killed and more than 40 people were wounded in these 3 accidents. And there was a long story, like like in the film of Zodiac, when the person was writing the messages, official messages through newspapers, and promising that if he or she will not be granted with some money, so there will be more deaths. And what is interesting here, why I'm telling he or she, because we don't know until now who was doing all that, because more than we can see it than 70 years, and the spent through this time. So this is not a closed case. This is open case, but the person is not identified until now. So this is ongoing still procedure of the recognition of this case and identification of the terrorism. And I don't know if it will be solved. So in 2004, it is also an interesting case because there was an explosion on the Tryeshina market. It's a large market in the city of Kyiv. And one person was killed and 14 were wounded. And this attack was made mainly because of political reasons. So the 4 people were captured. And it is believed that these 4 people were representatives of the political party, and they told that they using this explosion as an attempt to start combat with the regime that existed and they part at that time. And this is not the clear story, because these representatives of parties these were representatives of parties that were taking participation in the party, in the bloc of Viktor Yushchenko, and who was running as a president. And actually, the after the massive falsifications in 2004, as we know, the revolution, the Orange Revolution started. So many like researchers and journalists are saying that this is very difficult story, because there is no clear evidence that indeed they were doing this for the political reasons, and many believe that in such way there was a attempt of the present government to blame and to darken the bloc of Yushchenko. So, but nevertheless, these 4 people, they recognized that they were guilty, so they were put it in the jail for for different years, but approximately for 15 or 17 years. There were a number of different also terrorist attacks. Luckily, some of them were not killing people, and the many of them were connected with the false identification of the deeds. So the people were simply doing that because of the self PR, or because of, in brackets, jokes. Nevertheless, in 2017, there is also an interesting case when one of the representatives of the city of Kharkiv, so it happened in Kharkiv, Volodymyr Bezukh, so he take hostages 10 people in Ukrposhta, so this is Ukrainian post in Kharkiv, using a toy gun. And the main reason for that was self-PR, because he was asking anyone to do photos, to post in the social media. And so through this, he wanted to make himself, his name, very popular. So luckily, everybody was security afterwards, and this was an operation that was done by the Ukrainian security services. So afterwards, everything was okay, and as far as I know, he's now in jail for also for like 15 or 17 years. And the most recent case happened actually in 2020, and it is connected with so-called Lutsk accident in the city of Lutsk in Volyn region. So, and we probably remember, because it was a recent case when Maxim Krivosh take more than 13 hostages in the local bus, who was going to some of the small villages from the city of Lutsk, that is administrative center of Volyn. And this is very strange case, because it is unclear. Maxim Krivosh was his main demand was to President Zelensky to announce that publicly the people should see some of the green videos. So he was accused with the green terrorism, so supporting the nature. But actually, when Mr. Zelensky announced it, and when Maxim Krivosh decided to stop taking the hostages, so when he got out of the bus, there was like approximately up to 2 minutes when he was waiting until the police simply come and captured here. And there were also some mystifications and believings that this was used as a case for the political games, like to show the strengths of the Minister of the Interior Affairs, Mr. Avakov, to show that he is an important figure. So there are a lot of blames towards that case. Nevertheless, we have more cases, like, for example, in Odessa, in attempts to even burn some mosques that fortunately people were captured, and this was prevented. But you can see here that in the majority of cases, these are not direct results of war. Yes, definitely, we have people, as in case of self-PR, or as in case of the taking hostages in the kindergartens, when the people were simply have some troubles with their psychology. And this is also could be one of the reasons of the terrorist attacks, especially of the home terrorist attacks, as we were talking about during the lectures about overall terrorism. So not only religious affiliation or political reason or freedom fighting, but sometimes we can see such cases that are happening, and people using the terrorist motives and methodology just simply to get some money or to become more popular. But together with these physical actions, actually, we had a big push in terms of the cyber terrorism. And there is a tricky thing, because cyber terrorism is not officially included into the list of the terrorist attacks in Ukraine. But there are some changes in the number of the legislations in the other countries, and they started to put cyber terrorism as a part of the terrorism threats. And here probably we can remember the cyber attack of the malwares. And for example, in 2015, when Black Energy malware was used as a cyber attack on Ukrainian power grid on the Prikarpattia Oberenergos, that left more than 200,000 people for the few days without power. And the other cases were, for example, this malware Petya or not Petya, they were simply stopping the activities of the local governments and even the Ukrainian railway station. And despite we have the little bit calm of the situation in the eastern part of Ukraine, luckily once more. Nevertheless, we have a tremendous increase in the number of these cyber terrorism attacks that are happening even right now. So in 2020, the National Defense and Security Council announced that from this year, starting from the beginning of 2020, there were more than 1 million of cases that are connected with cyber threats. and they are connected with attempts of the cyber attacks. And actually, if you compare all the cases starting from 2006 until the 2020, you can see that Ukraine faced 16 major significant number of the cyber attacks that actually influenced the overall security situation, or even caused to some injuries or wounds of people. And this is also an interesting case because it, once more, this is not direct the terroristic act, but very connected with the activity of the terrorists, just in the cyberspace, and they are also connected with Russian, because we definitely know that this malware or blackware were done by the Russian terrorist groups, and especially in terms of Petya, of this virus Petya, that they were practically designed to hit the Ukrainian security system. So this is one of the new forms of terrorism that is not directly connected with kills or injuries, but nevertheless is doing a lot of harm mainly to the critical infrastructure of the country. So what are the main features, if we may say, of terrorism in Ukraine if we look through all the cases? First of all, we should name that they all have the hybrid character. So, and while somebody is taking responsibility for these acts of terror or for committing terroristic attacks in the world, like ISIS or other groups, there is no clear side in Ukraine. These are either the separate people who were doing it for the very personal things, but to the major events, and especially events that are connected with the war in eastern part of Ukraine, there is no clear side. Nevertheless, to some extent, we can clarify that they are connected with the Russian aggression, and these terrorist attacks are due to the Russian aggression. The interesting case that the majority of the detained terrorists in Ukraine were Ukrainians. And especially from the eastern part of Ukraine in the recent years. So once more, political analysts and military analysis are just showing that this is one of the form of this hybrid warfare that is done by Russia. So they simply choose and buy Ukrainians for doing this acts. That doesn't mean that Ukrainians are good, but nevertheless, this are such tendency. What is also interesting, the major attacks are of terrorism, because we remember that this is not like simply of the purpose of killing, but to bring terror, to bring chaos, and to bring the policy of fear to the society. So there is great amount of personification of terrorist attacks. So the major cases, the well-known cases, are very personified. So either these are killings of the Ukrainian journalist, like for example the case of Pavlo Sheremet, the journalist who was killed, and still the investigation is going. Or for example representatives of the battle groups like Amina Okuyeva, who was the representative of the voluntary battle groups. She was in herself, she was of Ukrainian origin, but then she took Islam, and she was fighting in the Chechen group in the war here in Ukraine with the Russian aggressor, and that was the case. There are also a lot of mystifications about her death. Not clear. The process is still going on, but people are, and some analysts are also showing that this is to some extent this is connected with the Chechen leader Kadyrov, who was by such attempts, by such killings, showing that he also can influence the situation. And also some killings, direct killings of the Ukrainian security service officials, especially, for example, Maxim Shapoval, who was the head of the military intelligence office. So by these, once more, such personifications is showing the, as in old times and methods when the terrorist groups were hunting for the some of the leaders or prominent people. So unfortunately, but this is also very common to Ukraine. The other feature is symbolism of attack, actually, because a lot of cases are happening in the very prominent days, let's say, for Ukrainians. For example, one of the attacks was done in 2015, so it was explosion during the day of the Dignity celebration. So it was 1 year after the Revolution of Dignity, and in Kharkiv. So this case was devoted like to that day. Or for example, in Odessa. So this year in Odessa, in summer, there was an attempt to burn local mosque, and fortunately it was stopped. But nevertheless, it was once more dedicated to the Constitutional Day of Ukraine. A number of attacks that were stopped were also dedicated, what is strange, to the date of the birthday of the former President Petro Poroshenko. Then, interesting fact is also the change in frequency and types of attacks in the Ukrainian environment. So starting from 2014, the data analysis is showing that we have increase in the numbers of cyber terrorism that is happening usually in summer. Then in autumn, we have an increasing number of the attacks on persons. And in winter time, we have increased the number of the different false notifications of, for example, mining railway stations or supermarkets or airports and so on and so forth. And at the end of the year and in spring, especially at the beginning of the spring, we have an increase in cases and shootings in Donbass. And this is also very strange because we can see the clear periods. So it doesn't mean that somebody is controlling that, so we don't know that. But nevertheless, the military experts and security experts also showing that to some extent such character of and frequencies and different types of attacks that are changing each other. It's usually happening when there is somebody who is trying to control the situation or to influence the situation, because they're so different, and that simply means that the specialist even can't take one story. So they're from different origin, and usually even if they are connected, it's really hard to investigate if they are connected, who is staying behind them. And that is why this investigation periods are taking longer period of time. And that's also is a part of the hybrid warfare when people do not see the results, because it's hard to take these results after the shorter period of time. And like it is believed that it could be also used as the hybrid threat, the element of the hybrid warfare, like to increase the actually to decrease the people support from the officials or from the security service. So what are we doing in terms of terrorism in Ukraine? Actually, in the legal sphere, because in many countries, once more, there is their own legislation. So this simply means that all the cases that are connected with the terrorism or with the other criminal actions are defined in the national legislations, because there is no the universal overwhelming agreement or convention on combating of terrorism. So in Ukraine, we have law on the fight of terrorism that is pretty old, in 2003. And in this law, the Terrorist Act is defined as a crime in the form of weapons, as you may see, committing an explosion, arson, or other actions under the article of 258 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. And in this article 258 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, it's stated, actually all the cases when Ukrainian legislator considers terrorism attack to be a terrorist attack. So it's use of weapons, commission of blast, commission of arson, commission of other acts that create danger to health, to life, or cause significant property damage or other serious consequences, or just a threat of such actions for the specified purpose. So we can see that pretty the same as we have the international level, we also have such cases here. So this is a main article concerning terrorism, and what is interesting that during all the operations in the eastern part of Ukraine that considers to be the we called it ATO, so anti-terroristic operations. So this article was also used and is used until now. But also a number of the criminal offenses linked with the terrorist activities are investigated in the other articles of this criminal code. So like the involvement in the commission of a terrorist act, public calls to commit a terrorist act, then creation of the terrorist group or terrorist organization, facilitation of a commission of the terrorist act, and also financing of a terrorism. So different features that are concerned not only of doing such act, but also, for example, like financing act or supporting this. And once more, that is so strange when we have the increased number of these cyber terrorist attacks. Nevertheless, it is something separate, so it's not included into the articles that are connected with the terrorism directly. So usually in Ukraine, we have different structures of the security of defense sphere are responsible for this terrorism. That to the major extent is also some kind of the problem. However, in the majority of cases, and even after the new conceptions of the new conception of the war with combating the terrorism. So this is a new document that was adopted in 2019. So the major coordinator of the anti-terrorist activities in Ukraine is the security service of Ukraine, and precisely the anti-terrorist center under the security service of Ukraine. So this entire terrorist center is responsible for development and providing different recommendations on how to combat terrorism, also collecting information, doing some analysis and evaluation of information about the situation in Ukraine, about the trends in the world, and doing reports, so even the closed reports that are shared among the security service. So also organization and conducting of the anti-terrorist operation. That is why, for example, there was a need to change the type of the anti-terroristic operation in the eastern part of Ukraine, because not only security service or the national police was included there, but militaries. So that is why we have now joint command, so the joint groups, and not only security service is included. However, until the 2018, that was actually not militaries, but state security service that was engaged into that activity. Also, you can see the organization conducting commandant staff and tactical special exercises and trainings. Also interactions with the different bodies of the foreign countries and international organizations who are also responsible to fight for terrorism. And what is important that the terrorism and the financing of the anti-terrorist center has the separate budget within the state budget of Ukraine, so it's not dependent too muchly on the actually on the overall budget in Ukraine within the security service. However, we can see that in the recent years, security service on Ukraine and overall police services, that they have an increasing in budget. So that simply means that we are spending a lot for these terrorist activities. But it's very hard to calculate directly, because one more, like the border control also has the anti-terroristic activities, and military inside, they also have these anti-terroristic activities. However, in general, if it is not connected with the war directly, so this anti-terrorist center within the security service of Ukraine is the main point of coordination. So as I told, in 2018, there was a new concept introduced for combating terrorism. Why? Because the previous one was of the 2013, and until now it was really out of date. The conception of 2013 was mainly concentrated on ISIS and on the prevention of the religious-based terrorism, for example, of the Islamic communities, of the Muslim communities inside of Ukraine. Also, it was mainly focused on the cooperation with Russia and former Soviet countries, and there were a lot here about the cooperation with the local NGOs and think tanks who are involved in terrorism. That is to some extent good, but is not so good in terms of the wartime. And the new conception was try to update and mainly focus on the recent problems and the recent agenda. So it clearly defines the main problems, and such as, like, definitely the war in Donbass, and it recognized so-called DNR or LNR, or Donetsk, or so-called Donetsk People Republic and Luhansk People Republic as a terrorist organizations. Also, it also recognized Russia as sponsor and the country sponsor of terrorism. It focused the problems of the separatist movements, especially in the national minorities, then illegal weapon trafficking, overall counter-terrorism system, new technologies that are using for conducting terrorist attacks, and so on and so forth, a number of these main problems. Then it defines the main priorities. It's actually security service and anti-terroristic center as the main coordination center, because once more, there were a number of these the number of these forms that are present in the number of the security bodies, and sometimes there was even the competition between the different services for conducting this or that anti-terroristic activities. When I was considering like this anti-terroristic center, then the security service as a main body. Then deep international collaboration with EU and NATO, trainings, and especially sharing of the information. Cybersecurity became a part of the agenda eventually. Then propaganda and informational warfare, hybrid warfare, and actually building an infrastructure and system, how to include, recognize, how to prevent, and how to act, became a part of this conception. And then civic trainings. So they moved a little bit from the collaboration with the civic organizations, because actually it showed that the cases on the eastern part of Ukraine, when Russia used a number of such organizations to actually then to conduct the separatist and terroristic attacks. But here, the civic training seems more in the general sense of the training of the civic population. Then it also defines the main steps and indicators that should be reached in terms of Ukrainian combating of the terrorism. For example, institutional mechanisms of coordination. So overall, the system in Ukraine should be built according to the NATO standards, and especially in terms of the anti-terrorism. So there are a lot of changes to the structures, even is announced. And also this prevention of competition between different kinds of services who have functions of the anti-terrorism. Then finances, so financing anti-terrorism campaigns, then sharing of experience with the other countries, legislation updates, and also like technological updates. And it's calls to use more technology and services in the anti-terroristic or counter-terroristic actions. For example, there is even a program how to push the usage of drones for identification of terrorists and combating also terrorists. So this is a newly updated convention that sets the key priorities for the next years. However, with this convention, definitely there are some of the problems that still occur, that still we have, and according to the report of the National Institute for Strategic Studies, they identified mainly the main or key problems that to some extent they are also named here in the convention of 2019. But one of the problems is actually the statement that indeed war in Ukraine is considered to be the main source of the terroristic attacks and in influences in Ukraine. Nevertheless, Ukraine is not, there are different types of the countries that are believed to be the most interest for the international terrorist groups to conduct the terroristic attacks. And Ukraine is not on this list of countries, fortunately. However, despite that fact, Ukraine could be used, and it is identified as a type of countries that could be used as a transit state for the international terrorists. And indeed, in 2017 and 2018, we have a number of cases when security service had made a number of arrests of terrorists in Kharkiv, Dnipro, in Kyiv. And what is interesting that these arrests were, so the people were arrested that were representatives of the ISIS groups. They simply were moving from Central Asia to Syria. Or, for example, there were also people arrested who were doing recruitment. For Syria, representatives of Ukrainian Muslims. And number of researchers showed that there are not so many, let's say, fighters of ISIS of the Ukrainian origin. So some of them are from the Tatar origin, but there are not so many of them. So as of the recent research is that there are like around 100 for this whole period of these of war in Syria. Nevertheless, Ukrainian territory could be used, so the security of the borders is increasingly important issue here, both in terms of the operations on the eastern part of Ukraine, the Ukrainian security service is conducting, but also limiting the ability of such terrorists to cross the territory of Ukraine. And this is a very tricky thing, both because Russia is also using the pathways through Ukraine, for example, for weapon sorry, for sharing the weapon, and for simply letting different terrorist representatives and groups going through the territory of Ukraine. So there is why migration control is also important and considered to be one of the problems with the more than 2 million of the IDPs because of the Russian conflict. There is also a danger because according to the laws of these people, especially who moved to Russia, and there is a group who moved to Russia. So, but still, to some extent, they could kept Ukrainian passports, and there could be a danger after they decided simply to return here to investigate if there is no signs or ideas of for them to commit some of the terroristic attacks. Then, cybersecurity. There is a growth, as we see, of the cyber terrorism and informational terrorism that is not considered to be a part still tremendously of the Ukrainian legislation. Nevertheless, we have the number of such cases that are growing. So here, the both updates of the legislation and then building a structure who can prevent, who can combat with this cyber terrorism is also important. Then effective exchange of information, especially within the counter-terroristic bodies in the European Union and NATO is a task, is a challenge for us. So here the collaboration has been done, but still there are some differences about the bodies and about the responsibilities of the structures who are acting, and so there is a big need for our structures to be a part of these international networks. Then development and protection of the critical infrastructure, it is still a challenge. Still an important point because as even we saw through the cyber terrorist attacks that you can simply lock the natural abilities of the society. So we can stop, for example, factories working, or once more, you can stop this black mail war that hit the Prikarpatia Oblenergo, was also hitting, for example, the railway stations. And for 2 days, Ukrainian railway system was simply blocked. So the Ukrainian critical infrastructure and the development of the ability to prevent terroristic attacks is still a changes. Then the use of new technologies that we were discussed, and now we have it in the strategy to be more involved and included into our thinking, into our legislation, into our practice, and control of finances. What is also important. So once more, fortunately, we don't have too many cases and tremendous cases that are connected with the money washing. And this money is spent for the terroristic attacks. However, in the country that have more than 40% of the economy in the gray zone, so it is still a big challenge, like to identify the finance flows and to understand that are not spent to the financing of the terrorist attack is still one of the challenges, and the main interest also for the Ukrainian security service is playing here because it is part of the global game when the networks connecting to each other and working together, like to simply to stop the possibilities of the different terrorist groups to be financed and to be controlled. So this is the main problems that, or challenges, let's say, that still exist. And once more, unfortunately, within the old global trends, Ukraine is facing like the very serious problem of peace. And the majority of cases and the majority of problems are simply coming because and are connected because of the war in Donbass with Russia. So the more secure system we will build, the more possibilities to prevent terroristic attacks in our society we will have. And how to do this, what actually legislation we should take, and what will be the responses to the current needs. So let's talk it in um, during the other class. And thank you.